One very unfortunate development in Australia in the last couple of decades is that we've become extremely litigious. In fact, by some measures, we are the second most litigious nation on earth, quickly catching up with the Americans. And one thing that's fueled this is the phenomenon called litigation funding. This is where people, investors, invest in schemes which then put money to fund class actions, often speculative class actions, in the hope that they come off, and if they come off, they collect an enormous windfall. It's effectively gambling on the Australian court system, and it's being done by people overseas. Overseas people betting on the Australian court system and fueling this whole culture of litigation, which is harming business and harming individuals. One person who's been looking at this very closely is James Mathias of the Menzies Research Centre. James published a report some years back which threw a spotlight on this, the big class action law firms and the litigation funders behind them, and he prompted some action from the then coalition government, from Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who put caps on the amount that they could pay out and therefore pulled that industry back a lot. But wouldn't you guess, Labor come to power and they've undone all that. James joins me on the line now from Melbourne to talk about his latest report on this. James, welcome to Reality Bites.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It's good to be here.
So what is the situation now that you highlight in your report? How bad is this industry become?
Well, Nick, the problem was once again reignited by the Labor government during this term, but the problem actually began when Labor was last in office in 2012 to 2013. What they did was remove any meaningful oversight, regulatory oversight of litigation funders. And what that saw is, and it wasn't a coincidental rise, after those regulations came off, the amount of class actions being launched in this country exploded. And more litigation funders flocked into the Australian market because it is now the second most profitable market for launching class actions in the world. So what's happened, Nick, is Australia, we invented the black box, we invented Wi-Fi, the Hills hoist, and we also, unfortunately, invented this thing called litigation funders, where essentially a finance company can come in and say they are backing a class action, and before even the risks are assessed by the court, they can have a predetermined claim as a percentage of the winnings that they'll get at the end of it.
And we're talking huge amounts, aren't we? What are the returns that you get if you put your money into, say, Omni Bridgeway, one of the largest litigation funding companies?
Well, let's start with a benchmark. If you invested in the AEST over the last 3 years, you would have made an average return of 7%. But Omni Bridgeway, backing class actions in Australia over the last 3 years, have made on average an internal rate of return of 98% per year. Now that's an enormous, an excessive amount. And just remember this, Nick, that money doesn't come from the businesses, that money that comes out of the pockets of the very people that have been awarded damages in these claims. And I'll just give your viewers this statistic. Since 2009 to 2020, there were 41 class actions launched in Australia with a litigation funder backing it. Now, claimants, victims, were awarded $2.4 billion over that time period. The lawyers, they took $350 million of that, and the litigation funders took another $650 million. So that 2.4 that was assessed as damages going back to victims, they only got $1.4 billion of that.
Yeah, because they often, the defenders of this absolute scam often say, well, we're helping bushfire victims, we're helping them get compensation from whoever. But for what you say is, essentially for every dollar that the court awards somebody in damages, they end up only getting 50 cents because the rest go to the lawyers and the litigation funders. Is it really that bad?
Oh, Nick, it's just absolutely atrocious. And of course, what they do in trying to protect their business interests is stand behind this whole notion that they're for the downtrodden and it's all about access to justice. Well, let's just debunk that. Omni Bridgeway, for example, is one of the largest litigation funders operating in Australia. In 2019, they received more than 350 applications to run class actions. And do you know how many they funded? Less than 10. So if it was about access to justice, why wouldn't they be funding more class actions? What they do is they have very sophisticated investment committees who oversee every application, not based on access to justice, Nick, but based on access to profits. This isn't about anything other than the next BMW for these guys.